Hello, welcome everybody. This is Charlie, and we're contemplating the cosmos today. Um, you know, uh, Let me just preface this show with something that I had kind of bouncing around in my head right before. I dedicated this whole channel and this whole journey to exposing truth and lies and kind of how to interpret information, evidence, what is evidence, and things like that. I feel it's necessary to kind of preface this with the thought that you know everybody has an angle, everybody has a viewing lens, and we're going to really explore this very deeply today. We're going to explore deeply that there's things that we can identify to that we don't know how to identify to until you understand the keys, or there's a certain language that you can identify to. You're not going to understand somebody that speaks another language unless you kind of have a grasp on that language. So that's kind of where we're going to kind of dissect this stuff very deeply. And I felt it necessary to bring Robert from Apocryphal 1970 back, and Alek Gearhart. He made a movie that I was very inspired by. I posted it on my channel. I'll probably put a link in here as well eventually. But I'm going to bring these guys on real quick, and then I'll introduce them. Hey, Alek. Hey, Robert.
Hey, guys.
Hey, Robert. Did you get a haircut?
Yeah, I got all of them cut.
Hey.
Well, sweet, man. Well, I appreciate you guys coming on, and just in time. It looks like we figured out that link, so that's good. What do you guys have going on this week that was potentially exciting? Robert, how about you?
Nothing. This was the highlight of my week right here.
Nice. Well, hopefully we can make it like the icing on your weekly cake here. So Alex, I don't know. I kind of sprung this on him like a week or two ago.
Sorry.
Like that I wanted to bring him on and hash out some of the stuff. Now, if you guys haven't seen his documentary, The Bible is a Trilogy, it's on my channel, or you can go to his channel, which is Alien Productions or something. What is it?
I think Smoking Alien 3, or there's one called It's Biblical that has I think has it on there as well.
Yeah, that's the one I saw, I think.
Okay, yeah.
But, so I see, the thing is, like, I've come to realize that my perspective is becoming very distorted because I don't know if I can really say that everything that I held true in my life originally, maybe it's not the same thing that it was then, but maybe I just added to it. Who knows? But the reality is, I started realizing, so that this language that I'm talking about, we started identifying to a language, you might say, where you can interpret things, and a lot of people, obviously, like Robert has been an inspiration to both of Alek and I, as far as presenting these extra biblical books, what is inspired word and things like that. And Alex seemed to really present a lot of things that could suggest that more than literature can be inspired. It can actually be written into our reality. I don't know. You want to speak on that, Alex?
Yeah. Hey, Robert. Good to meet you. Officially.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
I just spoke to him on the phone before, but now visually. But yeah. I mean, I think it's possible. It makes a lot of sense. The same keys that Robert finds in the scriptures are probably in all reality in one way or another. I mean, you have dogs. You have foxes do have holes. Like all the things that Jesus uses as the example are the literal features of these, like animals or nature or different things. Night. And I guess the assumption that taking some of what Robert said and then kind of just extrapolating it, because I guess the reason I was kind of extrapolating it into all reality was because the idea that these stories not only are literature stories, like parables, but that some of them happened in real life. So I was wondering, is this just baked into all reality, and these parables are basically acting themselves out at all times, like, and we're not even realizing it, like the number, like on some of the parables, like it's a specific, like it's a 12-year-old girl, which has significance, and there's a woman who was bleeding for 12. I think she was bleeding for 12 years, but yeah. So there's all these features. So I was like, so this really happened, and these people were these real ages, and then also they have this literary feature. So that's kind of where I was kind of seeing it as like, just trying to see, like, is this in everything? And I think it might be.
I don't know. What are your thoughts, Robert? You're on mute, it looks like. Here, let me, I can unmute it. Hold on. Try that. Are you there still? The heck? It says the mic isn't connected. Oh, geez. Right.
Oh,
there it is. Oh, I can't hear you.
I think it's still muted, Robert. Still muted.
It says that it was unmuted. Hold on, let me try something here. It says it. Well, anyways, can you? I don't know what the audio is doing, Robert. Yeah, you could always log out and log back in and see if it changes, but that's weird. I don't know why it's doing that. So yeah, as he's kind of getting that figured out, I'm going to welcome William to the chat, and Valentina. Appreciate as people start trickling in, there's people coming, it looks like. But
oh, cool.
So, and again, I'm not like one of those live streams where like there's a million comments. Oh, I hear you now, Robert.
Okay, that's good. Maybe. All right, that's good.
All right, yeah, go ahead. You were about to say something.
Oh yeah, well, I mean, as far as it extending out into reality, I mean, obviously the reality that we exist in, if there is a living God and he's in charge of everything from beginning to end, it does seem like there would be features like this baked into reality. It doesn't seem like it'd be all an unusual thing to expect from an almighty, all-powerful God who has something to say about literally everything, and how every mouth will be shut, stopped, and that kind of thing. For him to actually to be in 100% control over all of existence, or at least have a rationale or reason for everything, it does make sense that this would extend into reality. That's not always my angle when I bring this to people, but one of the things that I used to sort of notice was not necessarily the more positive angles, but for example, Satanism. When like, why is there such a thing? Why, if there was no God, why would there be a devil? That kind of question, like, who's he opposing? You know what I'm saying? Or what? Like, I used to listen to a band back in the day. I used to listen to a band called Depeche Mode, which I don't know if that's before your time, but if you listen to a lot of their lyrics, I mean, he's clearly speaking, as
they're antichrist.
A lot of it in first person, and it makes you wonder, what is their motivation and what are they trying to say and stuff like that. And I don't want to get off on that tangent, but I mean, it occurred to me at the time that there really was such a thing as a devil, and that he really was, chipping away at our values and our morals and things like that, and it certainly exists out there in terms of, he has a plan, he has a kingdom, he's building a mystery, so to speak, moving things along in his own trajectory, in opposition to God, building a Babylon. You can clearly see that. And a lot of people, like, even if you watch like award shows and things like that, he can parade himself. I mean, he can very literally go out and on the stage, with his actors dressed up in red and with little horns, and go through satanic things. And, it seems like half the population out there just sees that as, that's nothing, but if you're a Christian, of course, you see that as something, right? And so you see a little bit of, that out there in the world. Not always easy to see the positive things. But I think Alek did a really good job of making his case that there's a lot of that just sort of baked into movies and stuff. But I haven't seen the movie. I watched your documentary like about 3 times by now. I did watch some of it last night, and then the rest of it this morning before I went to church. And I was sort of impressed by the case that you made, because a lot of this stuff, like you said, is just sort of serendipitous that it happens, but you can find these parallels in them. It's not usually the tactic that I take, because my approach is that, like, the Bible is it has literary features within it. Like, when you try to suss out these keys and stuff, you do it on basically a literary basis, that you're looking at it from the point of view of rules of grammar, even, and that's the universal appeal to it. Like, when this is the gospel for the whole world, for example, when it says that every eye will see him, I think, it's not just him in the sky manifesting himself or whatever, but because he says even those who pierced him, but it's talking about like the atheist eye and the Christian eye and the Muslim eye. You know what I'm saying? There's something universal there for everybody to recognize. And so it's got to be something fairly objective for people to see it and to recognize it, and having these keys on a literary basis. Like, I was just talking to the congregation this morning about that. We were discussing the Gospel of Thomas, but the idea that you suss out these keys on a literary basis, like by means of similes, by means of metaphors, by means of parallelism, it's almost algebraic the way that it works. And in the examples that were given, just to further underscore, it is kind of algebraic. It's kind of like A, B, C, and D. The seed is the word of God, the field is the world, the sower is the Son of Man. It's as if you're just putting meaning into these variables and playing it out. And then he says, well, how would you understand any parable? As if to say, this is the means by which you understand all parables. And if that's the case, for example, you can be an atheist and understand similes and metaphors. You can be a Muslim and understand similes and metaphors. You can be of any religion. And because it's a picture language, especially, it's very concrete. So it operates on the sort of the concrete, even though it's spiritual, because the spiritual is couched in concrete terms. Like, you can, because these words exist in every language, and you touched on this in that in your documentary about how every language has words for things, like the waves and the winds and the trees, and these things are just basic features. And the reason why it's great that the meaning is attached to these concrete, tangible things, for lack of a better term, is because it keeps it from being too, how shall I say, philosophical and nuanced and subject to interpretation or whatever. It's very, even though it's spiritual, it's still, because that spiritual is couched in things that are very concrete and very sort of discrete in terms of their meaning, and in terms of their interpretation. It's as simple as basically it can be. It's very allegorical. One of the reason, like the way that I know about allegories and stuff like that, was I used to read this person who was a writer for, I think it was the Chicago Reader, a guy who's named Cecil Adams. And he did an explanation about the Wizard of Oz, and it's kind of famous, it's kind of out there anyway, but the idea was that people who are familiar with the movie, there are some differences between the movie and the book, but that the Wizard of Oz was essentially written by a guy named L. Frank Baum back in the 1890s or something like that. And he was a progressive at the time who was looking to move away from the gold standard and move into the silver standard, because silver was more abundant, and he thought that this would be more beneficial to society and so on and so forth, to push this agenda. But the idea is that he couched these ideas in concrete terms within the book. Like, for example, in the book, Dorothy, the protagonist, has silver slippers. They embellished that and made them ruby red for the movie because it was in color and that was more eye-catching or whatever. But in the original movie, they were silver. And so when she was walking across on the yellow brick road, and she had all these the munchkins, let's say, basically they're symbolic of sort of the mental midgets, if you will. I mean, not to be insulting, but that was kind of the interpretation that they were told. They were advising her to follow the yellow brick road, which yellow bricks were symbolic of gold, like gold bricks, right? And so the idea was, stay on the gold standard, do what everybody else does. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Follow the yellow brick road. You know what I'm saying? And that was the idea.
Mm-hmm.
Was that even though it got her to Oz or whatever, but the idea was that, for example, when the house fell on the Wicked Witch of the East, for example, if you know anything about American history, the symbolism there was that the Eastern Seaboard, that the Wicked Witch, so to speak, was conquered by civilization. In other words, it was built up, and she died or whatever, and that she received her shoes or slippers or whatever from her, and as she was going on her road or whatever, following the road, right, she was going to end up in Washington D.C., which was symbolized by Oz, right? And there everybody had these green sort of glasses actually in the book, but it means that they saw everything through the lens of money,
yeah,
right? And so that got me thinking, like, okay, so in other words, these are symbols. They're not just, it's not just a simple little children's tale or whatever. It was trying to tell something beyond itself, and at the end, for example, the Wicked Witch or whatever was conquered by water, which was like saying the Western United States, if you could do sufficient water management, you could conquer the metaphorical Wicked Witch of the West or whatever, through irrigation and through building of dams, which is in fact what eventually happened by and large. And the symbolism, like the Tin Man, for example, that he was symbolic of the victim of the industrial age. They were trying to reduce people, or people were inadvertently or whatever being reduced to these machines or whatever.
Yeah.
But deep down inside, they still had a heart, and they were still, human beings, for crying out loud. And the Scarecrow, for example, that the stereotype, if you will, of the farmer or the agrarian people out there was such that they were simpletons and they weren't smart or whatever. But in fact, they were. You had to be in order to grow food and to grow crops and to do all that they do, right? But that was the stereotype. And that the Cowardly Lion or whatever supposedly represented like the big city bosses or whatever, people like William Jennings Bryan and other people who were basically a lot of bravado, but in a sense were kind of cowardly, but maybe deep underneath it all, they were still, but everything had its symbolism, and that the wizard or whatever represented the president or whatever of the United States, and that, he was sort of a fake and a fraud and did everything kind of behind the curtains or whatever, but still kind of held things together or whatever. But the idea was that I started thinking, okay, so you could actually have a story where things actually mean things beyond themselves.
Yeah.
And so when I started looking at Bible stories and stuff, I sort of had that template of the allegorical interpretation. And it started to occur to me that these features existed in the Bible as well. So kind of to your point, that these things exist in the secular, they exist in literature on one level or another, to whatever extent they might parallel the Bible, or they might just be a thing in themselves. They do exist. Allegories are a thing.
Yeah.
And that the Bible is basically has those same features. It's allegorical. When he tells the tale about, the sower, it is basically an allegory that he explains.
I was with the, so there's like kind of a system to like, mythology. Like if you go back and to like the beginning of literature in general, it seems like it was a theme to have some sort of mythology to express, and like when I was growing up, I always kind of took mythology as being something that's fake. It's just not, there's nothing that's real about it, or maybe it was real, but it was embellished. And I started thinking, like, gosh, as I started realizing the depth of this mythology, I remember hearing this guy describe the Bible as a book of myths. And it was offensive to me. I was like, how dare you say that the Bible's a book of myths? And but then I, as I start to understand this stuff a little better, it's not so insulting anymore. And it's not even so much that it's, tarnishing it somehow. It's more that the mythological approach is really just, I don't know, you always use the word couching. It just inhabits like some sort of deep meaning. And so I think that a lot of people miss the point. Like those glasses that they're wearing are, they're being diverted away from the true meaning of something. And I was explaining to Alek before we even came on that maybe our minds are somehow just tuned into like a specific frequency. Like we are all conduits in a sense. Are we conduits for the Holy Spirit? Are we conduits for for Satan, like Satan's purposes or whatever? And so does that mean that everything could have some sort of purpose written into it, like Satanism? Now I was thinking about I don't know if you're familiar with Chuck Missler. Chuck Missler?
I've heard of him. I don't think I've listened to anything of his in particular.
So he passed probably like 2 or 3 years ago or something, but he showed me something, with his research that I thought was very interesting. But it was in the Bible, and basically, the patriarchs of Genesis, each of their names has a specific meaning. And do you ever hear about this? So basically,
where you have like the names Adam and
Adam, Seth, Enoch,
and
Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, and Noah. So all those names, when you actually take all their names systematically in order, and just explain the meaning of what their name is, I'll read it out in a sentence. It goes, "Man appointed mortal sorrow, the blessed God shall come down, teaching his death shall bring the despairing rest or comfort."
Well, I mean, that kind of speaks for itself. I mean, a person who was familiar with the meanings behind words would understand that there was a message behind that particular arrangement.
Well, I mean, it kind of makes me wonder, okay, was God really speaking to each of these people individually? Like, this is the knowledge or the inspiration. That's their name. God named them through the conduit. Or is it something that, was overseen by like a committee, like the council in Nicaea or something?
I think it is probably you're stumbling onto something that, I mean, that's kind of what I feel like kind of found through this too, is that it's just there, and you only, like, I think you guys were talking last time about riddles or something, like once you see that it's there, you look back, oh shoot, you didn't even know that it was there, and it was there the whole time. And I think God might be just doing that through everyone this whole time, even without people knowing. And then when they look back, they realize he was there the whole time, even though they thought it was their idea, but it was, actually.
And a lot of times it's just so in your face obvious when you see it. It's you wonder how you didn't see it. And a lot of what we're talking about here is stuff that when you look at it, it seems obvious. When it's explained to you, it seems obvious. And then when you think about for 2,000 years it wasn't all that obvious to people, you kind of see the hand of God in that. Like when they were on the road to Emmaus, for example, and Jesus was walking with them and talking with them, it says that their eyes were being held. It says that they were not able to recognize him. And you see a little bit of this too, just throughout the life and the teachings of Yeshua. Like when he's able to walk through a crowd and nobody's able to lay their hands on him.
Yeah.
How is that? Somehow or other, he's got this divine protection, both in terms of his perception and in terms of his, no one is able to impede him. People were sent to take him, into custody, and they would come back and they would say, we couldn't do it. Nobody's spoken to man the way this man has, or, things of that nature. There's a divine protection there that is protecting this mystery and our perception of it, until the time of the end, like how in the Gospel of Thomas it says that I have cast fire upon the world, and see, I am guarding it until it blazes. And yet in another place he says, whoever is near to me is near to the fire. So when he's identifying himself as the fire, and then he's saying he's guarding the fire until it blazes, then that's the Logos, or basically him, right? Until it blazes. So he's basically saying nobody's going to see this or understand this until the time, right? And then at that point it will blaze forth, let's say metaphorically. In other words, it'll turn from something smaller and low key and more or less hidden because he's guarding it, into something that blazes forth, And so, I mean, that's what in fact we're seeing. That's what I think each of us is trying to present, from our own perspective to the world. Because that's the thing. I mean, a lot of what you were saying, Alec, was just stuff that, I mean, I realized I had said this quite a bit, but you kind of took the ball and ran with it, and you were able to build upon a lot of it, and then see things on your own. And that's the whole nature of this, is that it's there to be seen and to be heard and to be understood, and then to be built upon. Because when it speaks of the elect, it's never some one individual. It's always a grouping of people. It's always in the plural. And that's because each one of us is going to have our own, how shall I say, ability to see and to recognize and to speak and to be, to lend ourselves as members, if you will, his members, his hands in this world, his feet in this world, his mouth in this world. We're going to be seeing finally with his eyes and with his ears and speaking with his words to the world as a group, because again, it's always in the plural. He cometh with 10,000s of his saints, that kind of thing. It's supposed to be something that everybody's on the same page, everybody understands. And these are things that are talked about, as going to happen. No one will have to teach you. You will just know, and those kinds of things. It's not a matter of agreement. It's not a matter of, any kind of oath or anything like that. It's a recognition. It's like opening up, a veil and seeing inside, and so when you look at it, it's like, yes, of course, that's what it means. Yes, of course, that, the whole names thing that you just went through, that can't be for no reason. It's a sentence, it's coherent, so I mean, you're talking about a feature that exists literarily. And see, that gets me back to the point of it being a literary argument, because it follows the rules of grammar and syntax and that kind of thing. These are things that are open to people that are even outside of religion. In fact, it could be said that the people that might have the hardest time with this are the people who are really bound up in religion,
I think so.
but yeah, it's more or less objective. When I was an atheist back in the days before I was a Christian, I was kind of a particular kind of atheist. I was somebody who was reading, I don't know if you've ever heard of her, a person who's kind of popular back in the 60s and somewhat in the 70s and 80s, a person named Ayn Rand. Yeah. And she called herself an objectivist, right? And the idea was that she had a term for people who didn't have direct perception. She called them second-handers. These are people who know things because they were taught them by other people, and that they spoke with other people's words and they thought with other people's thoughts. And, I was really against that. I thought, why wouldn't you just want to see things for yourself and understand things for yourself and literally become yourself, right? But apparently in the scriptures, you have that same freedom, to break free from the traditions that you were taught, from the constraints that you were given secondhand by other people, and see them firsthand, with your own eyes and with your own ears, and that they were objective in a sense, such that you wouldn't even have to be a believer, and I think that's kind of a sticking point with people too, because, the idea is that with faith, somehow faith is like seen as positive, and gnosis or knowledge is seen as negative or suspect. One of the biggest groups that they tried to stomp out early on in Christianity was a group called the Gnostics, right? And I'm not saying that all of them were right. I'm not saying that all of them were on the same page, but the presumption was, and the whole reason, for example, that the Gospel of Thomas was more or less dismissed out of hand, and even now by theologians, is because one of the first things it says is whoever comes to recognize the meaning of these words, right, will not taste of death, as if to say salvation comes through knowledge. And some people are really against that, just on the grounds that it's knowledge. But then Jesus also says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. So he basically tells you it is through knowledge.
But I mean, it says that my brain just lost it there. Hold on, it's right there on the tip. So by the renewing, be transformed by the renewing of your mind.
Yeah, there you go.
So I mean, if it's not about being transformed in your mind, then what is the transformation of mind?
I think that's one of those things that, because I've noticed that recently too, because sometimes I try to talk about this stuff, but yeah, that's one thing that comes up, because it sounds like they're waiting for like a power to set in and then change your mind. But even on the level of the flesh, it seems like it still is like if you were to just learn Christianity through a pastor, it's the same. It's really the same thing that's happening, is you're just getting new information and accepting it. It's just that somehow it gets lost along the way. People think that it's like there's a negative to it, even though they're doing it regardless. It's just, I think it's just that the idea of the Gnostics, I guess, because a lot of people accuse people of being Gnostic. But then when you actually look at what's written, it's like, oh, that sounds a lot like what John was saying, in the gospel.
Well, the knowledge, I think, was always meant to be sort of hidden, because, I mean, just structurally, what I'm asserting is, and what I'm hoping to demonstrate, I guess, is that things were encoded to be decoded.
Yeah.
And so if you have an encoding of something, and then later on you have a decoding of something, it means that the entire conveyance, the entire period in which, between the time that it was encoded and the time that it finally is decoded, there's going to be an interim space where people aren't going to know the meaning. And so for the people in the interim, they have to just sort of believe that there's going to be an answer without actually being to articulate the answer, And if you're not able to articulate the answer, then the best you really have is faith. I believe in God because he's saying things that resonate with my heart and my soul and my mind and my spirit that I agree with. You shouldn't kill, you shouldn't steal, you should do what is right, you should do what is honorable. And it's all sort of on a moral basis. And, it's sort of a measure of your character during the interim, more so than a measure of your knowledge. Are you willing to submit to truth, even if it costs you, even if it hurts you? Are you going to do the right thing? Even, what I'm saying? So for the people in the middle, it's a test of their faithfulness, is a test of their character, a test of their willingness to submit and to, what I'm saying? And so, but if you're having to take somebody's word for something, again, that's from the outside in, or perhaps you could see it from the top down. Some authority has said these books are in, those books are out. Some authority has said this is what this means, that's what that means. So they're taking it on the basis of some authority, and of course it's common knowledge that there are different churches, different authorities, different teachings, different canons. Just a superficial analysis of it would tell you they couldn't all be right, except in maybe in a very general way, but in a specific way, there's no way for them to all be right. And so they contradict themselves, they contradict one another. Is there something objective? And you read something like the Gospel of Thomas, where he says, why are you asking me about the end? Have you figured out the beginning? Because the end is at the beginning. What that means is, look, it's encoded to be decoded. Once you decode it, you see what was encoded. Or if you're able to encode it, then you understand how it's going to be decoded. They are the same thing. The end is the beginning if you understand it through that paradigm, right? So the idea, is that there's going to be a falling away. There's going to be, we're going to go from spiritual life to a spiritual death to a spiritual resurrection.
Hey, Robert, you had mentioned that, why is my brain doing this to me? Like every time I'm about to go say something, I'm bleh. Keep talking. I'll come back to it. My brain's too fried apparently. I hear my kids screaming in the background too.
Hey Robert, in looking at the kind of coming to this, it's only been basically since the beginning of 2022 when I started to see like the metaphorical thing in the scriptures. I think it's pretty close to at least to what you're teaching. I kind of noticed, well, you saw in the movie, I tried to kind of break it down by the millenniums and Barnabas.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you kind of do that too, where you have like the first 4 is like the time in the desert, the wilderness. Right. So the time before the word came, so before Christ came.
Mm-hmm.
And then the next 2 is
Mm-hmm.
the 2,000 years in the middle, like you were just talking. And then you have the singular 7th or 3rd millennium of the Christian
Mm-hmm.
age.
Right.
And then I have one I added. I'm not sure how you feel about that, where 5 is related to the fact that he came in the 5th millennium.
Yeah.
And then the 6 just represents all 6 that were mankind's understanding is kind of reigning over. And then also it could just be that 6th millennium, which was, you could definitely see a noticeable uptick in kind of like madness, or definitely like World War II, all the, that stuff,
The way that that's broken down, if you imagine the periods that you're talking about, and for those people who haven't understood, the idea is that if you read the Epistle of Barnabas, it tells you that 6 days were given over to man to work. The 7th day, of course, being the Sabbath day. But he explicitly says that because it says that a day shall be as 1,000 years, right? He's saying that those 6 days symbolically represent the 6,000 years that are given over to mankind for men to do as they please or as they see fit, more or less. And that on the 7th day is the millennium. And if you read the book of Revelation, you know about the 1,000-year reign. That's spelled out explicitly. But what's interesting is this pattern. Okay, one of the things he says about himself, he says, I am he who is and who was and who is to come, right? So that's 3 different time frames, right? Is, was, and is to come. And then he talks about the times being divided. He says that he speaks of a time and times and half a time, right? So when they say that the time is at hand, right? That's a time is like 2,000 years, and then times is 4,000 years. So the time is what is, and the times are what was, right? So that's 2,000 years is what is. The times is 4,000 years. That's what was. And then the half a time is 1,000 years. It's a millennium. That's why it's a period of rest. And that's why in the book of Revelation, it says that there was silence in heaven for half an hour, right? Because that's the half a time or 1,000 years. In other words, that's 1,000 years where we reign as kings and priests or whatever. But that's the way it's broken down into what is and what was and what is to come. And then the order is even the same: the time, the times, and half a time. See the way it corresponds like that.
Mm-hmm. So Robert, are you suggesting that the clock is ticking down, like we're running out of time, or we're getting toward the end? I guess in some ways, right? What is the end to you? I mean, is it just a transition into the new way of thinking or something? Or
we're going to be transformed. I think what's happening is you understand that the weeds are gathered up and cast into the fire first, and then the righteous shine forth after that. So as obviously the wicked are still among us, they're still here, obviously. So that hasn't been completed just yet, at least from our perspective. I mean, from the eternal perspective, that's already happened. But from our perspective, we're just playing it out. But what I think is going to happen is that we are going to be transformed, not just in terms of our knowledge, but in terms of our spirits and in terms of our natures. That we, like when you see, for example, Saint Stephen, and he's testifying before, the leadership there, and before Saul and before all those others, they're witnessing him transform into his angelic nature. And Saul, among others, was able to look at him in his transitioning phase into something beyond human, and still condemn him, because something about his nature, I guess, allowed him to do that. Because even when his clothes were placed before him, he was approving of that. But Stephen was transitioning. He was looking up into heaven, and he could see the Son at the right hand of the Father, right? So he was peering into other dimensions. This hasn't happened to us just yet, but I believe that what we're going to go through is a transformation of sorts. At some point, that's going to happen. Now, it may come. Again, I don't know how that's going to play out. I don't know if it's spelled out or if it's just something I haven't been able to recognize or whatever, as far as what that is. But I think that's what's going to happen. That the truth is going to come out, and that people are going to be able to, how shall I say, do things that normal human beings can't do, like it was once done in the Book of Acts, miracles or that kind of thing, prophesying and that kind of thing. I think we're on the cusp of having those kinds of things happen. But I think that the wicked right now are basically being bound up, by their sins, by their involvement in this world. And it's just the mystery of iniquity is playing itself out, and that Babylon has to at some point fall. And Babylon essentially is kind of a con game. People buy into it, and it's funny that in the book of Revelation, it speaks of nobody buys your merchandise anymore, and then it goes on to, enumerate just what all of these things there are, the souls of men even, but, the idea is that at some point, this whole paradigm is going to collapse, and I think that that the elect are going to be a part of that. But until those people are gone and the mystery of iniquity is completely done away with, it's completely run its course and fallen under the weight of its own folly and its own evil, right? Then we're not going to have the space to become what we were meant to be. We will be like the angels of heaven, as it speaks. And that, we will have the ability to live 1,000 years because something about us will be immortal at that point, or, not subject to death at that point.
Yeah. This person asked, is the United States modern day Babylon?
That one's been going on a long time.
Yeah, I would say that Babylon is a spirit in a sense. Or it's one of the government systems described by Daniel.
I think doesn't Paul kind of talks about that when he talks about like the Jerusalem above versus the below. And I think do you incorporate that with that, Robert? Like the below is more like Babylon, or
yeah. Well, yeah, it is clearly I think what the United States represents is the best that a man could come up with. But the object lesson in that is, even under the best of circumstances, human evil and human nature is such that even the very best laid constitution, the best thought out government, the best example of things, that it's still subject to corruption, that it's still subject to mankind, and that it's going to stand basically forever as this was the best you could come up with, and still it was susceptible to corruption, still it was susceptible to death, still it was, what I'm saying, to just kind of show, because there's a point to all of this. There's a lesson in all of this, that no matter how good something can be, literally Satan cannot cast out Satan. You can't create, even in the most ideal of secular realities, you cannot eliminate evil. Only God can do that. Even the United States was probably one of the better examples of that. Isn't to say that it's without its evil and without its sins, but if you want to look at it as the even when it says about itself, in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, that it says about itself that it intends to be, even with the most well-meaning of people, even with the most well-meaning, what I'm saying? I think it's meant to stand as a testimony to the very best that human society could come up with, but it still fails.
Well, a perfect system can always be corrupted in time. I mean, like the leaven aspect of it. I mean, because like Christianity, Jesus warned that Christianity would be. He didn't use the word Christianity, but he basically said that the church, or the ecclesia or whatever, would be like tainted. It would be diluted by things creeping in and just. Which immediately, when I'm saying that, a lot of people would allude to the fact that the Gnostics actually are the thing that tarnished the direction of Christianity. But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. That was
I
pretty
was
good.
going to argue that there's some really interesting features within the Bible that explain to us one of the things that happens. I mean, you read in Jude, for example, it talks about people creeping into the church. I mean, this is presumably, if this is written by the brother of Jesus, right? This is happening very early on in church history. But I think one of the more interesting passages is in the third epistle of John, where it says, let me see where, if I can find it here. It speaks of this person named Diotrephes. Here it goes. It says in 3 John, starting at verse 9, it says, I wrote to the church, but Diotrephes, who loveth to have the preeminence among them, receiveth us not. And this is John. This is the beloved disciple. So here you have an example that's laid out to us that very early on in the church, not just Christians, not just people with the truth, but the apostle John himself was shunned by the church that Diotrephes was in, right? It says, wherefore, if I come, I will remember his deeds, which he doeth, prating against us with malicious words, and not content therewith, neither doth he himself receive the brethren, and forbiddeth them that would, and casteth them out of the church, right? The idea is that the early church didn't even welcome the apostles. You know what I'm saying? That the apostles themselves were persona non grata at some point. And so this happened very early on, which corresponds with the way that Jesus speaks to Judas figuratively. What thou doest thou quickly, because Judas represents these types who, with a feigned affection, like, why even be a church if you're going to reject the apostles? I mean, what business do you even have being a church if you're going to reject the beloved disciple of Jesus himself? Someone who's literally laid his head on his chest, and Jesus let him do this. I mean, just the idea that you could run a church from that particular vantage point and treat these people like dirt, it just goes to show that the rot was there from the very beginning. It just goes to and when he says he's going to come back and he's going to testify, well, I mean, just the truth of that comes back to testify against them. It's true in that sense that you can point to that and say that's how the apostles themselves were treated, within the church, not even by the secular world, but that's just it. These people were disingenuous, and I feel like they knew what they were doing. They had it in mind to subvert this mystery, and apparently were able to turn entire congregations, against the apostles themselves. So obviously, if that's the kind of thing that represents what happened in Christianity in general, that the evil people really did come in, they really did subvert the truth, they really did teach against what the apostles taught, and probably subverted, any kind of secret, teachings or whatever that would have survived from them, were probably systematically destroyed by these people, because again, they love to have the preeminence, but it's astounding to me that could have been the case. I mean, it's just astonishing to me that the church itself would reject one of the apostles, I mean, at all, but the beloved, disciple of all people. It's shocking to think that was at the inception.
Yeah, I mean, and even it's kind of interesting how much emphasis Jude puts on. Obviously, like, I guess that means that Enoch is also putting the emphasis on it, but how significant that event actually is, the subverting of I guess the knowledge of Christianity, because I guess in a way, the truth of all reality, in a sense, was revealed through Christ to the Christians, and so like by whatever it was, coming in and subverting that, they kind of ruined it for the whole world in a way. And now, that's
Man, everything. Sorry, keep going. I was gonna say, like, there's something to this, like, trying to figure out the truth. I mean, my whole channel's based on trying to identify truth for what it is, and like the implications of whether you have truth or not. Like, as much corruption has come along and actually subverted the fullness of what Christianity or the truth. kind of makes me really start wondering about how much truth there actually is. Like, it's all just buried, and everybody has to be in this kind of frame of mind in order to expose truth. Like, you can't, like, how in trouble this does seem to me like a narrow road. A narrow road, you know what I mean?
In a way, it is. I mean, here's kind of the long and the short of it. What it is that is that if you understand the mystery, if you're able to discern the patterns, like I was talking about earlier, the literary patterns that existed, right? Coupled with the fact that you know that, for example, Jude is referring to the Book of Enoch, or that he's also referring to the Assumption of Moses. The fact that in Second Peter, for example, he talks about the sow that was washed goes back to her wallowing in the mire. That's taken from the story of Ahikar, or the idea that Paul would be talking about the life of Adam and Eve when he talks about the devil himself transforms into an angel of light. These people were clearly reading beyond what we are told is canonical, right? And they're reading it as if it were true. I mean, again, not to sound like a broken record, but when the quote is, and Enoch also, the seventh from Adam, prophesied of or to these men, and then it says that long lengthy quote, behold, he cometh with 10,000s of his saints to execute judgment upon all, and to convict all that are ungodly among them, etc. Just structurally, just literarily, like, you could be an absolute atheist. You could be a hardcore atheist and say, look, just look at it from a literary standpoint. What are his assertions? Whether you agree with it or not, what are his assertions? He cites the name of the book. The book was popular. So when he said that, he knew at the time his contemporaries would have taken that to be that particular book, right? He calls him the seventh from Adam. Whether you agree with it or not, that's his assertion. So literarily it stands, right? He says that he prophesied. Whether you agree with him or not, whether you're inclined to believe him or not, beside the point, that's his assertion, right? And then he gives you this long, lengthy quote, so there's literally no doubt in your mind that that is the very book that he was referring to, and not some other book of Enoch, that might have theoretically existed at the time, right? So he's basically saying, here's the name of the book. It's old, it's prophetic, it bears on the people who are infiltrating the church right here and right now in my day and age, right? So I'm taking it out of the antediluvian age and into my age and making it applicable to my time. And then the quote that I'm using has to do with the Lord's coming. So I'm extending its applicability not only out of the antediluvian age, but I'm making it relevant to my age, and I'm also extending it to the age of the time of his coming. Right? That's literally what he's saying. That is something that a Christian or an atheist or a Muslim or anybody should be able to suss out of that literarily. So, in other words, if it is a fact that the writers of the New Testament are referring to these books, and they're referring to them, not just as literature, not just as like, maybe if you're in a church and you want to talk about the Wizard of Oz, or you want to talk about Star Wars or something like that, you want to make analogies, okay, fine. That doesn't necessarily mean that they're inspired or whatever. They're just common. Okay, if you want to treat these books like that, you have to account for the fact that he uses the word prophecy. You have to account for the fact that he gives it its antiquity. You have to account for the fact that Paul evidently takes it as an article of faith that Satan literally did transform into an angel of light. You have to take all of those things into account. They're not treating it as though it's just popular literature. They're not treating it as though it's just analogous or, some useful tool for, whatever, just so, because it's a common thing that other people are somehow familiar with or whatever. They're treating it as though it's scripture, and there's tons of places where things outside of scripture are mentioned as scripture. In Matthew, it says that, he was raised in Nazareth to fulfill the scripture that reads, he shall be called a Nazarene. We don't have that anymore. It's not in the Old Testament. So what's he referring to? Or in James, where he says, does not the scripture say in vain that the spirit within us within him lusted to envy, right? The idea is that they're referring to these things as scripture, even though we don't have them. So what accounts for that? Who's right? I mean, the fact is, there's a line drawn in the sand. Are you with Jude or are you with men? Are you with Paul or are you with men? Are you with James or are you with men? Are you with Matthew or are you with men? Right? I mean, the line is drawn. And the idea that the delusion could have gone on for so long, right, without these obvious problems, being resolved, right? It just means that people whose job it was to resolve these problems, the scholars should have spoken up. The theologians should have spoken up. The preachers should have spoken up. Or even if it comes down to it, the general populace should have spoken up. Somebody should have spoken up, right? But that didn't happen. In fact, it was so far from people's thoughts that it was just like as if it were nothing. But that's how far we are removed from believing the scriptures. If you take the epistle of the Hebrews, for example, in the 11th chapter, the chapter of faith, right? He makes allusion to at least two apocryphal and pseudepigraphal books. He makes an allusion to the second book of Maccabees in that, and he also makes allusion to the prophets being sawn in two, when at the time it would have been a popular apocryphal book at the time would have been the martyrdom of Isaiah, where he was sawn in two, right? So that if you cannot make it through the chapter of faith without abandoning, what is being said in the chapter of faith, and siding with the theologians and with the what I'm saying? The idea is it just seems like an obvious test of our faith and an obvious thing that we're doing wrong. If we're going to negate the prophets, we're going to negate the scriptures in order to make men right. And especially when the Bible says, let God be true and every man a liar. So we're basically in rebellion, whether we're trying to be or not. We essentially are. We're basically not believing, whether we intend to not believe or not. That's one thing. But it's clear that the people whose job it was to pass these things down to us led us astray. They made excuses for these things. They tried to sweep it under the rug. There were whole teachings against, what I'm saying? But why would you make yourself right at the expense of the writers of the scriptures if you're a believer? Why would you do that? That seems almost blasphemous to do that. If it should be crystal clear that if the prophets are saying one thing, you should be standing with them against tradition. You should be standing with them against the scholars. It does say that the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and that the weakness of God is stronger than men. If you consider these books to be foolish, well, God doesn't. And if you consider these things to be of no effect and have no strength and no standing in the scriptures, well, apparently God does. So you find yourself at odds with the creator and the writer of these things, the spirit of these things. And again, what's the unforgivable sin, right? Is to blaspheme the Holy Spirit. Well, these people all spoke as they were moved by the Holy Spirit. The Bible actually says this, right? So if you're going to find yourself in disagreement with the people who wrote these things, you're basically finding yourself in disagreement with the Spirit, contradicting the Spirit, fighting against the Spirit, blaspheming against the Spirit, whether you intend to or not. You see what I'm saying? So you find yourself basically on the outside looking in, right? When you should be on the inside looking out.
Yeah, I'm trying to wrap my head around. So who are you referring to when you say someone's or like not in agreement with the apostles or the disciples or whatever?
When, for example, I mean, just the sheer fact that the disciples themselves are speaking of scriptures outside of what we have, for example, they're making allusions to books that we know exist as if they were true, right? And they're still taking the side of
I see what you're
saying. They're still taking the side of tradition against what the prophets are actually saying.
But even some of these extra biblical texts, it's like, how do we know that we're really looking at them correctly through the correct lens? And because when I consider like these, and again, I'm kind of speaking from ignorance because I'm not the one that went through and read all of them like you have, but like you talked to Zen Garcia, I remember listening to that, and he gets into some of this stuff, just, yeah, I just sometimes like, at what point do you draw the line? Because sometimes it just seems like it just becomes so convoluted. Like maybe I just don't have a full understanding of something, and I'm not ready for a certain text, maybe. And so, like, even the Bible, I actually feel like sometimes, like, I'm reading it to my kids and stuff, and like in my mind, I'm thinking, man, this stuff's deep, and it's like I don't even know if my kids can fully get a grasp of what's happening here, you know. And I don't
Well,
know, like, what? Go ahead. Sorry.
one of the things I was going to say is, hats off to Alec over here, because he's saying that he started, what was it, like January of last year or something?
Mhm.
You started
Yeah.
reading,
Yeah.
and here it is, not a year and a half later, right? And you're able to speak to all of these things. You're able to articulate all these things because you internalize them and you caught on, and you did so because you could see the kinds of things that were being said. You could understand from the scriptures, so you had a sense of that, right? You saw the point, right? And I think that's kind of the point, is to break those paradigms. See what this does. What this does is it destroys, it undercuts tradition. It undercuts the teaching. There's a false reality that you buy into because that's how you're raised, that's how you're taught, this is how it's explained to you. And not everybody who's got issues with Enoch or any of these other books, not all of these people are doing it out of any kind of malice or any kind of desire to hide the truth or whatever. They're doing it sort of inadvertently because it doesn't occur to them. It doesn't occur to them that when Judah's bolstering the credibility of Enoch, that's what he's doing, right? It doesn't occur to them because not everybody's going to sit down and stop on that and think about that and weigh all that in the balance. They're not going to stop and think about when it says that this is to fulfill the prophecy that he shall be called a Nazarene, that's not in the Old Testament, that there's not, a reference to that in the cross references or whatever. They're not going to stop and think about it. They're just taken for granted that for thousands of years, this is what people have taught. This is what the tradition has been. And they're just going along, right? But the idea is if these features exist and you can do away with the canon and you can do away with the traditions of men, some people might worry, well, okay, does that create a slippery slope, right? Oh, I'm supposed to just believe everything now, right? That's one thing, right? Or if you do, what is the basis for believing in any given book or whatever? The assertion is that there's a language that's being taught, that there are codes and that there are keys, and they exist both in the canonical writings as well as the non-canonical writings, and that would be your basis for having what's called an open canon. An analogy would be if I had several different books, and some of them were written in English, and some of them were written in German, and some of them were written in some other language. And if I just presented these books to you, and I said, okay, which ones of these books are written in English, right? So since you speak English, it doesn't matter what book you're reading. It could be anything, right? You could look at it and say, yeah, that's the English language, right? And you could make that distinction. So if these codes and if these keys or whatever are a language, right? Then when you read the Gospel of Thomas or something, you could look at that and say, well, I can read this on the level of the parable. I can read this on the level of the deeper meaning because I have those resources at my disposal. I have the eyes that can see the codes and the keys. I have the ears that can hear the higher level meaning, and I know that the Gospel of Thomas is written with the same rules that Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are written with, right? A person could then say, well, okay, maybe some random Christian out there also knew those keys and just forged the Gospel of Thomas. So even if you went that far in that direction and made that and threw that out there, it doesn't really change the fact that that language exists and that was known and was learned. And if you did want to be harsh and say that it was a forgery that was written on the basis of those keys, it still underscores the fact that those keys were known and still were valid because it was written according to that language. You see, so it doesn't matter how hardcore you want to be against these things. The fact is that throughout those 2,000 years, those keys weren't taught. So it does underscore the fact that somebody in the early church knew enough to write according to those keys, even if it wasn't Thomas. You see what I'm saying? So it doesn't matter, because if it was encoded to be decoded, right? The encoding is still there because you can decode it, right? So the end is at the beginning, or the beginning is at the end, because they're the same thing.
Or otherwise, it's inspired, right? It's either encoded or it's inspired.
Well, one of the points of that, the Bible is a trilogy, the documentary here, one of the points is to familiarize you with the keys and the knowledge. There's a series of tracks that I put up that's still on my channel, my YouTube channel, Apocryphal 1970 here, that's called The Guidebook for the Elect. And it was a series of 6 different tracks that I sort of hammered out over the course of about 6 months, back in 1997 and into 1998. That still today sort of stands as basically my fundamental presentation of these ideas based on the scriptures. And I don't have time to go into all the different, aspects of it, but the idea is that there are certain relationships between people and their names, for example, and the way that things are presented, like, for example, at the Transfiguration, and this is in that documentary as well, where you have on the Mount of Transfiguration, you have Moses, you have Jesus, and then you have Elijah, and then down at a little bit lower, you have James and Peter and John. And the idea is that there's a correspondence, sort of a one-to-one between the three who are in their heavenly form, and the 3 core apostles, the 3 pillars, so to speak, who are James, Peter, and John. Who do they represent? And it breaks down to where, like, Peter represents the church, because on their way to Caesarea Philippi, for example, Jesus asks the apostles, "Who do men say that I am?" And they give him different answers. And then he says, "Well, who do you say that I am?" And Peter says, "Well, thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." And Jesus answers him, says, "Blessed art thou, Simon Bar-Jonah, for flesh and blood has not revealed this to you, but my Father who is in heaven." And he says, "And I say to you that you are a rock, and upon this rock I will build my church." So Jesus is associating Peter, the apostle, with the church. And if you look at who Elijah might represent, or who Moses might represent, or who they might correspond with, if there's a correspondence between them and the other two disciples, the other 2 pillars, in other words, James and John, right? Elijah is spoken of as coming in the future tense, that he's going to come and to set all things right. So there's a future tense associated with Elijah. And with John, there's also future tense, when at the end of John, he says to Peter, Peter asks Jesus, "Well, okay, so if I've got to put off this tabernacle of mine, what about him?" And he's pointing to John, or he's indicating John. And Jesus says to him, "Well, if it should be my will that he should remain until my coming, what is that to you? Right? You follow me." So again, John is spoken of in the future tense, just like Elijah is spoken of in the future tense, right? And then that leaves Moses to correspond with James. And so when you see James and Peter and John together, for example, you have to think parenthetically that you're talking about the Jews, the Christians, and the elect who are to come. And that's a little bit underscored by the fact that Peter sort of asks Jesus, because it says he doesn't even know what he's talking about. He says, "Would you like us to build a tabernacle here? One for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah," as if to say, we're going to have 3 tabernacles, or 3 different congregations, or 3 different dispensations, or 3 different groups, or however you want to do it. But the idea is that you have the tabernacle, if you will, of the Jews, the tabernacle, if you will, of the Christians, and the tabernacle of the elect, right, so to speak, that are basically implied in that, and that that's not really how it's going to be. It's all one big thing. And but I mean, it's just that there's language and there's patterns there to be discerned. And if you see them, right, then that tears away the canonical boundaries and the canonical limitations, and it does away with all of that tradition, so that you can actually see, again, firsthand, not secondhand, through your own eyes directly, rather than through the eyes and the ears of other people and what they've said and what they've taught. So it's a matter of liberation. It's a matter of coming to see more than a matter of coming to believe. I'm not asking anybody to believe anything. The idea is that I'm trying to get people to see what is there and have that direct perception. Because again, he talks about, I will give you a what does it say? A mouth and a wisdom that no one will be able to deny or to gainsay, right? That is to say, there's not any way to reasonably argue, for example, that Jude is not giving Enoch his antiquity. There's no way to really argue that Jude is not appealing to his prophetic nature and his power directly. It's really hard to argue against that. So that's why they sweep it under the rug. That's why they pretend it doesn't exist. That's why they take Jude and bury it between 3rd John and Revelation, so that it's kind of not next to 2nd Peter, where logically it should be, because those two books are related. So there's a little bit of deception, even in the way the canon is laid out, because they do take and they do separate Jude from its proper context. Because again, 2nd Peter is written around the book of Jude, or else it's a collaboration, one or the other. But the two books are related, right? So why would you take and try to distort people's perception by hiding that book further back, so that people don't see it? It's an interesting question. And there's other things too, like even in the canon, what's interesting to me is that, like, for example, there's 1 book of James, 2 books of Peter, and 3 books of John, as if to say 1st, 2nd, and 3rd, like that. You see what I'm saying? There's just interesting little consistencies,
patterns
in that.
Yeah. I think, Charlie, too, what you're saying about, like, telling your kids, I think even how I look at it too, I don't know if it's probably the same, but like, I think you guys were talking about last time, like, how I look at it, like, it's, where does it say, like, oh, for me, like, on the cross, when they stabbed Jesus and his blood is blood and water. That's how I look at it. I think the word itself is flesh and blood, and then also water. So flesh and blood is like the nuts and bolts story, while the water is the meaning that's conveyed in it.
Interesting.
And like, I think meaning is attached to the spirit. So like, like people always say, what's the true spirit of this story? So basically, what is it really trying to say? So like, I'm trying to think of a movie that has like a really direct, like, like if the Wizard of Oz, like what he was talking about is really about this whole thing about the gold and whatnot, then the nuts and bolts, the flesh, was a means to show you that in a story. But you can enjoy Wizard of Oz as just a flesh and blood story about a girl who goes to a magical land. But then once you saw that there's all this other meaning into it, you see that it's working on I guess you could say, a higher level, like there's more to it. And then I think, to me, seeing that this language in the Bible, once you see, like, you have the flesh and blood that we've all been raised with, and then once you see that water's in there, that the meaning, and I think the water is from the point of view of God, who's outside of time. So it's him. You basically see that he baked it in from the beginning, and that it's basically he's talking to you direct outside of time, because he's able to like the parables within everything. So like, sorry, I got off on a little, but does that kind of make sense? Like, kind of,
yeah, it does.
Yeah, and that's
like I think about the the yellow brick road. Like, you're supposed to stay on it in order to achieve your ultimate goal. Like, it's somehow baking in that we're supposed to follow society the way, the main path.
Yeah.
Yet the You know, because there's a guy that messaged on the last video that Robert and I did, and I never responded to him because I didn't want to like start an in-depth conversation with him about it. But he basically said, "You're lost. You guys are lost, and you should just stick to the King James Bible." And I was thinking, you know, yeah, I mean, we could probably stick to the King James Bible and still, you know,
Still
get
find it.
and
all there,
still
but
follow the yellow brick road. You know, so ultimately, if we're following the yellow brick road of the Bible, maybe that's the broad path. You know, what if it's supposed to be the narrow path that you find the water that you're talking about that flowed from Jesus' side? And you know, what if that is what we're trying to convey, guy? You know, it's not about, you know, these extra biblical books as much as it is just finding, you know,
yeah, because I
Well, I
think
mean,
yeah,
I would underscore the fact that I wasn't looking myself. I wasn't looking for a ways to read these other books or whatever. That was never even in my thought process. My thought process was, as I was reading Jude, he's saying it's ancient. He's saying that it's prophetic, right? That's right there in the King James Bible. You know what I'm saying?
no,
If you wanna limit yourself like that, it springs from what you believe. It's already in the books that you want to limit it to. And if it's in the books that you want to limit it to, why is it there? You still have to address why he thinks it's ancient. You still have to address why he thinks it's prophetic. You still have to address why he thinks it's applicable to his age, and you still have to address why he thinks that it's applicable to the age to come. You know, the idea that you just stick to the King James or the 66 or the whatever you got, you still have all of these references to these books that are outside of the canon. How do you deal with those then?
Yep.
What is your point if that's the case? I mean, you're basically saying what I mean, I'm not trying to put words into his mouth, but I mean, if you really wanted to stick with that line of thought, just in any way, shape, form, or fashion, you have to basically saying, well, I'm just going to agree with what men have chosen over what Jude believes. You know, because even though
Yep.
Jude may say that, I just feel like it's safer to go with what people have said. You know, and when you say that out loud, it kind of sounds silly. You know, like why would you do that? I mean, would you say that? I mean, what about that? I mean, what risk do you run by believing Jude? I mean, if you were to stand before the Almighty at some point and say, listen, I took your word for it, right? You told me to believe your word, and here's what's written in your word, right? So you still have that kind of basic defense, you know. Or if you took the side of men, then what would you say, right? If you were questioned about it. Well, you know, I just did what I was told, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, you talk about the servant who just did what they were told, right? He's not considered a good servant because you know it says
Yeah.
we are miserable servants. We have just done what we were told.
It's what the
Right?
Nazis said.
But I mean, again, it's not that I'm just eager to go far afield because I'm trying to be a heretic or something. It's because by being a believer, you believe. You know, by by trying to see what is there, you start to recognize some of the fallacies in what you're being taught, and some of the contradictions in what you're being taught, and some of just the difficulties of believing what I can't imagine any scenario where you could side with tradition against the apostles, and that would be a good thing. You know, you could say, well, okay, don't add or subtract from what you're given. Okay, that's probably the strongest argument anyone has anywhere. I mean, number one, that's also written in Deuteronomy. So how many books have been added since then? You know what I'm saying? That's like one thing. You know, but for another, are you really adding? What am I adding? I'm reading Jude. It's there. What am I adding to Jude? You see what I'm saying? I'm just taking what Jude's saying and I'm taking his word for it. Again, that it's ancient, that it's prophetic, that it bears on his age and it bears on our age. You know, I'm taking his word for that. rather than contradicting him, rather than minimizing what he has to say, rather than watering it down, or sweeping it under the rug. I mean, one of the reasons that I kind of got my back up about it was that when I first read, in fact, I was reading this particular Bible that I have right here, and it referred me back to Genesis, right? When I went to, I thought, I don't remember reading that in Genesis, right? So I followed the cross reference and I went back to where it was, and it was like, no, that's not it. And so I started looking at other Bibles to see if there were other cross references or footnotes or something. And I went through maybe 4 or 5 Bibles before I hit upon a study Bible. And all that study Bible told me was that this was cited from the non-canonical book of Enoch 1:9. That was literally the very least it could say. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Without just glossing it over. That was, it was like it's like when somebody tells you the truth, but they tell you just the very tip of the iceberg, so to speak. They tell, because they don't want to lie to you, but they'll just tell you the very minimum that they could possibly get away with telling you and still kind of cover their rear. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of what I thought about the scholar. And I thought, so now you have scholars and the entire religious establishment basically misleading you, which to me just seemed patently unchristian and sort of coordinated. Whether it's some deep conspiracy, I don't think so. It's just human nature. You want to go along with the party line and say what you're supposed to say and not say what you're not supposed to say. And to me that just seemed like I didn't want to be a part of any of that deception. It seemed to me like, listen, if they're trying to cover these things up or they're trying to minimize these things, right, then they're not, I think, being honest. And so, without saying too much, it seems to me like they're basically, whether they're trying to be or not, they're basically deceivers at that point. They're basically trying to give you a misdirect. Sending me to Genesis is a misdirect, right? Or simply, just saying, well, this is cited from the non-canonical book and leaving it at that without answering why that would be, or anything. Just sort of like, here you go, and let's move on. You know what I'm saying? It just seemed inadequate. At best, it seemed inadequate. And at worst, it seemed like outright deception. And this is, to me, that just seemed more believable, that people just did not want that to be the case. They did not want it to be true, right? And so they swept it under the rug as much as possible. But the more I looked into it, there was example after example after example after example after example of books of the prophets, the New Testament prophets, the Old Testament prophets, referring to books that were outside of the canon. So if I'm believing what is inside of the canon, and that's my justification for going beyond the canon, right? And what is your justification for reading inside of the canon but negating what they're telling you? You've got one or the other.
That's a very good point.
You're going to justify it one way or the other. Now, I mean, again, you could open a Pandora's box, but like I was saying, if you understand the language in the canon, and then you see this same language outside of the canon, right? It's just like I was saying before. If I asked you if this book was in English or not, can you read it? Whether you like it or not, whether it's a good book or not. If all I'm asking you is what language is this written in, right? If you then understand the language of the parables, if you understand the picture language, if you understand the keys, right? If you understand the implications of what's being taught, like those are just the implications of what Jude says, that it's ancient, that it's prophetic, that it bears on our age. You know what I'm saying? Those are just the implications of what's being said. So you can't really deny it. That's the problem. That's why they sweep it under the rug. That's that in a sense it's like lying against the truth or trying to misrepresent what you know to be true. I mean, who's the guilty one? Is it Jude or is it you? Who's deceiving? If you somehow want to say that Jude is wrong, then you really need to push for that to be taken out, right? I mean, at least come clean about the fact that you don't believe him. I mean, I'm not saying that there should be a movement like that, but I'm just saying if you're just going to sweep it under the rug and pretend that it doesn't exist, that's not doing anybody any good. That's not resolving the problem. That's just muddying the waters.
Yeah. What do you think, Alek?
Yeah, I mean, just I mean, now I could see it like I could see, yeah, it's Jude quotes it, so that's my entrance, and I don't really need to go, asking somebody else since he's, already doing it. But I know, like, coming from that world, the basically, kind of some of the church world, and then I mean, I've always had like my questions, but then but just seeing how people operate, I think they genuinely, because of they've been taught. I mean, at least on the lower end, I think people have been taught that way, that like Jude is, it's like, Jude is just quoting one part, but the rest of it's not scripture. But that idea is probably nonsensical if you were to like really extrapolate that, since that's kind of like picking and choosing reality a little bit.
You talked about going a little bit far afield before. Like, this is, I don't have much in the way of a gripe against people who want to talk about the antediluvian world and all of that stuff. There are people out there who make a lot out of those subjects and those stories and those kinds of things. But I think there's a lot of just blind faith involved. Like, people want to believe about the Nephilim, so they'll use that as their justification for reading the Book of Enoch, because to them the story seems compelling, that it seems interesting, or that for whatever reason it grabs them, and they think it's interesting and maybe therefore true because it seems to ring true to them, or it just seems like something that, but they accept it kind of on faith. And I'm not necessarily against just accepting it on faith, but my angle's a little bit different, because I'm saying there are literary reasons for this. There's a basis for accepting Enoch beyond just that you want to, or just that you like it, or just that it seems consistent with Genesis or whatever. It's more than just accepting it on the basis that you like it and that you want it to be true or something like that. What I'm saying is that if you're able to pinpoint certain things about it literarily, and you actually have a literary basis for doing it, that's a stronger argument than just, I want to believe it, or it rings true. It takes it out of the world of the subjective and puts it into the world of the objective. The difficulty that I have with stuff like that is that it doesn't appeal to the non-believer. And to a large extent, it doesn't appeal to the actual Christian believer either, because let's say that you were going from the whole subjective angle, where you're talking about, okay, the Bible says that the angels fell, Enoch says that the angels fell, therefore they're both true. That leaves a lot of room for doubt in the minds of a lot of people, because that's not the proper basis for making those analogies, right? Because a person could take or leave it. A person could accept it or reject it, right? And it has no appeal to the person outside of Christianity at all. Like, if I'm going to an atheist or a Muslim or something, I don't have any basis for expecting that they will believe about the Nephilim unless they're inclined to believe about it for some reason, right? So it doesn't, ultimately, you're only going to go so far with that argument, because it's only going to appeal to the people who are inclined to believe it or have a tendency to want to believe it, right? But if you say something objective, like, listen, I don't care whether you're an atheist, I don't care whether whatever, the fact is that Jude is making those assertions, then that's actually something that you could speak to anybody on this planet about, and if they've got two brain cells to rub together, they can understand your point, right? Whereas if you want to go on about the giants and the aliens and the you want to tie that into, Zechariah Stitchin or other things, you know what I'm saying? That's all subjective, all right? But what I'm saying is, there's nothing subjective about saying this is a literary feature. There's nothing subjective about saying, listen, you can find these keys by means of similes, analogies, metaphors, parallelisms, process of elimination, given keys, those kinds of things. Those are things that you can actually point to with a certain level of objectivity and say, listen, they exist literarily. And because they exist literarily, and they haven't been pointed out for 2,000 years, that means that that particular aspect, or that those particular arguments or those particular observations have gone missing for 2,000 years, and yet there they are. So you're actually giving them something that they didn't have before, and you have the arguments and the bases for accepting them on an objective basis. That's why I believe that the gospel, that's why it's for the Gentiles. You see, because it's for the whole world. Anybody who has any level of honesty about them would feel compelled to agree with them, at least on some level. You know, whereas if you want to talk about, you know, whether they're questionable or not, they're not provable. You can't prove in a court of law that any of what is written in the book of Enoch is real or not to a person who doesn't want to believe. But having a literary basis gives you that argument. You see what I'm saying? It gives you a strong argument whereby even if you don't believe, you still have to look at it from a certain point of view of, hey, why does he say that? I mean, the thing is, if I were still an atheist, that to me, that would be a really compelling argument, because even if I didn't like Christians, which you might find among atheists, or you might find atheists and Muslims who maybe aren't too jazzed about Christians, right? They might actually enjoy the fact that these things prove Christianity to be basically false, at least on that level. You see, it proves that their teaching is false. So there's almost an appeal to the unbeliever, right? To want to push these angles, because it proves their point that the Christianity that they've known and that they've objected to, right, does have an Achilles heel. It does have a weakness in it, and you literally can lay the axe at the roots of those particular trees. You see what I'm saying? Because if I were an atheist, I would love to have the ability to go to the Christians and tell them, hey, look, I can prove that you're wrong. You know, looky here. You don't even believe your own prophets. You don't even believe your own apostles, right? I mean, you're like Diotrephes over here, right? I mean, I'm not saying you should do that, but I'm just saying that's the strength of the argument. Is that an unbeliever can go to the Christian and show them where they're wrong.
Can I speak to that real quick? So I have a friend that's in the chat that, you know, I used to talk to him on a deep level, and he was basically, he's, when I first met him, I think he was reading the Book of Satan just because he wanted some perspective. And he kind of came to the conclusion in his mind that Christianity is just another religion, and he was raised into it, but now he's like, I don't know about it anymore. So he's kind of dismissed it now. But every time I get in and start talking these topics, I think that I appeal to the things that intrigue his mind, I guess, because he likes to consider things outside of the box a little bit. And I appreciate that you're saying this exact thing, because, you know, he's still open-minded to, you know, understanding things on a deeper level. And you know, I guess on in some ways you could dismiss the, you know, not necessarily the Bible, but the traditions of man, because maybe that's what he's kind of grown to not be fond of anymore, I guess. But he is open to this, you know, angle of, like, you know, underwritten, you know, deeper meaning. I just think it's interesting. Like, it reminds me of a simulation. Like, we're just you know, wind up toys that are kind of in this realm of, you know, trying to you know, interact with the creation. But the creation is just so much more. Real quick, Robert, I know that one of my shticks is that I really want to prove things. So, like, early on, I was interested in this, trying to prove that dinosaurs were dragons. And it's fascinating to me. I love that topic, because, you know, in the medieval times, I mean, they always talked about slaying a dragon, you know, and it just makes me think a lot about, like, how, you know, dragons were mythologized, or whatever you want to call it. they're mythical creatures now. But at the same time, it's like, I think that, we do see bones in the dirt of things that are, large dinosaurs. And prior to, you know, Sir something Owen, the guy that was a curator for like this museum in England, that coined the phrase dinosauria, which was actually previous to that was a dragon. I mean, that's what they called dinosaurs, was dragons. So anyways, the point that I'm trying to make, I know you're like trying to, drive the point home about the literary, points or whatever. And I just think that there is ways to prove things. And you just got to dig. And I think that ultimately that's the key for everything, is you got to dig. You got to get into the deep, issues. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I remember one time as a youth, I had an aunt who was religious, and that was really the only place I had any exposure to religion. Every once in a while, my mom would send me to go, spend some time with her or whatever. And I got dragged to some Bible study in a place outside of Austin. And of course, it's kind of mountainous out there. And I remember the retreat that we went to was kind of up in the mountains, and there's lots of limestone out there. And I remember seeing little fish fossils, and I remember remarking to her at the time, hey, look, these are really cool. Look at these fish fossils, right? Because they're just everywhere.
Were they just out in the open, or?
Yeah, they're just impressions of, they're not uncommon. And then she said, oh yeah, that's from the flood, right? And I remember thinking to myself for years that the reason why there probably were all these flood stories is because there was uplift. There was probably times when the sea level was higher and the land was lower, and people looked at things. And like you said, dinosaurs, right? Well, they had dinosaurs in China, and they have dragon legends in China. They had dinosaurs, in the Middle East and all over Europe. I mean, all over the world, there were these dinosaurs, right? Was my thinking too. And that every place that had dinosaurs, they looked at these things and they said, oh, this must have been a dragon. I mean, look at that thing. It existed. It's real. So in their minds, they saw what was like uplift or whatever as evidence of a flood. That's why you have worldwide flood. You know what I'm saying? And that was my thinking at the time, was that they had some kernel of truth in that. There was some reason to believe it. Like, if somebody saw a dinosaur skeleton, of course you'd think it was a dragon, right? Or if you saw, fish fossils, at 1,500 feet or whatever, you'd think there must have been a flood, right? And so wherever you went in the world, they had dinosaur legends, and wherever you went in the world, they had flood legends or whatever, because they saw these things, and that was the best they could come up with. The water must have been all the way up here. You know what I'm saying? And that was what I thought for years, was that there was just some rationale for it, and that religious people or whatever, they didn't know about dinosaurs. They didn't know that the earth was, billions of years old or whatever. They didn't know about uplift. They didn't know about the oceans going up and down. You know what I'm saying? In my mind, I was like thinking about it scientifically, that these things they're just their explanations for things that we know better now, and so, I mean, that was my rationale for all that stuff back in the day before I became before I became a Christian. I mean, was that there was a kernel of truth in it. There was something in it that made it universally understood and believed or whatever, but it was all based on their lack of knowledge of geology, But
yeah, do you care about stuff like that, Alec? As far as
I'm more, now more into this literary feature thing, because I find it actually is like a means to seeing at least creation and everything, and also the Bible. But I did before I was reading like Enoch and stuff more like from like, I guess, flesh and blood, physical giants and stuff. And I was entertaining the idea, because I think in Jubilees and in a few of the books, the 12 Patriarchs book, in Enoch, it mentions the creation of the giants, basically the Nephilim, and like the description, I think in Enoch made me think, like, I wonder if, like, because I'd say you'd have to find bones of giants at some point, and then you do, but they're dinosaurs, and there's some of the books almost imply there's like genetic manipulation back then with the angels. So I was like, I wonder if dinosaurs are just like was the Nephilim or something, you know, like the actual giants that were mentioned, because you don't really know how they operated, you know, like because there's a lot of movies of dinosaurs, but I was like, I wonder if there was more like, because they kind of look like, if you were to think of a T-Rex, you know, like little T-Rex arms, kind of seems like it almost looks like a bad mutation, you know, like a bad created being, or like all the horns on the specific, like all the different Triceratops have all these weird horns, you know, but they're kind of similar.
Isn't that what the Book of Giants talked about? Is that there was manipulation?
Yeah,
or
so that's what I was
crossbreeding
thinking.
and things like that?
Like dinosaurs might be like there might be a negative connotation to them.
Yeah, they talk about in the Book of Enoch they started to sin against, you know, birds and reptiles and that kind of thing.
So
And it's again, this is getting into speculative stuff. I don't really like to get too much into speculative stuff, because I mean it's speculative, and besides all that, it doesn't its appeal, whether it's true or not, it has a limited appeal. The people who are inclined to believe it are going to believe it, and the people who are not inclined to believe it are going to be inclined to not believe it, and it doesn't get you anywhere, you know. And that's why I try to avoid all kinds of other things. Like I try to avoid anything that's peripheral, because it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. That's not the way to get the point across to everybody. The literary angle is something that I think is unique, in that it does give you the ability to speak to everyone, Christian and non-Christian alike. You know, the fact is that if you can have an intelligent discussion about Tom Sawyer, if you can have an intelligent discussion about the Wizard of Oz, if you could have an intelligent discussion about, you know, Star Wars or something, just in the context of literature, just in the even if you want to call it fiction, right? You can still have a conversation in the context of calling it a fiction. You're talking to an atheist or somebody, still you can say, hey, listen, just look at this literarily. Just look at it like it's Star Wars. Look at it like it's Huckleberry Finn. You look at it like that. All right. Just humor me. Okay. Come, you know, just, you know, humor me here. Right. What does it say? It's telling you this, right? Why is it saying this? And moreover, if it's telling you this, why don't Christians believe it? Right. Why don't they? They say they believe this Bible, right? But they don't believe that, right? That might pique their interest. You know, it doesn't matter whether the dragons existed or the giants existed or what the cosmology is or whether the earth is flat or not. It's only going to appeal to certain people, and it's not going to appeal to other people. But this is something that cuts through all that. This is something that demonstrates to anyone who has the ability for critical thought on any level, right? That gives them the ability to see points that they otherwise wouldn't see, and you don't have to be a believer to see it.
Could I can I show you guys something? I guess I could screen share. I was wanting to so like with the keys, I feel like sorry for like splitting you off, Robert. Because I feel like there's a way to, like, because every story, you know how like Revelation seems to rhyme, so like not rhyme, but like it's just like here's the whole story from, you know, Jesus coming till, you know, the corruption, and then us finding the truth again in the millennium, and then it just keeps doing it again from a different angle, like over and over and over. And I kind of see that same feature, like if you were to go through Acts, you could probably find the same parable, same thing over and over and over. And I think to split it up in the reason I'm doing this is because I just want to show you, like, I want to show you 2001: A Space Odyssey, and just get your thoughts as to why is this same feature in this movie that's in the Bible. Because I know the guy who wrote it, like I think Arthur C. Clarke is, I'm pretty sure he was an atheist. And then also I don't think Stanley Kubrick was, I don't think he was a believer as far as I know. So I think this meaning.
Oh man, he gets into some deep underwritten like stuff though.
Okay. Yeah, no, he's interested in stuff. But I'm wondering is if, since, you know, like in John it says everything that came into being through him, through the word, essentially. So like I'm just, it's just like a test, like, well, movies are something you could see that came into being, and sometimes you wonder, like, you know, like, is there something, is there a hidden meaning that Stanley Kubrick put into it? But I guess my thing is, like, I wonder if God just put his meaning into it without him even knowing it. But I just want to kind of show you, like, because I don't know if this is right, Robert, but how I would. I don't know if you guys.
I'm gonna make your screen bigger
Okay,
here. Hold on
sorry.
a second.
Robert, if I were to, can you see this? If I were to kind of split up like some of the parables, I would say like you have like, so there's like, you know, how Barnabas talked about the 6,000 years. So you have 6,000 years total before the millennium. The first 4,000 into the fifth millennium is the time in the desert, the time where God was known, you know, through the law and those kind of things. And then in the fifth millennium, obviously Christ comes and reveals the word and basically the understanding of him in the Old Testament, and then pointing forward to the coming of the elect in the millennium, which is just people who can, I guess, expound these mysteries and everything. And so it's 6,000 years given over to man, and then you have the elect, which is, if is that correct? You would like children is another parable for that, Robert? Like another way to look at the elect?
Yeah, I think that's broken down in the correct fashion. The 4,000, the 2,000, and the 1,000, like that.
Okay, so yeah, this would be the 2. So that, and then children is attached to 12, right, Robert? So that'd be like understanding the 6, so the flesh, but then doubling it is to understand flesh and spirit kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think the same thing happens with 7 too. That 7,
yeah, 7
twice is 14, and
right.
like it says in the Gospel of Philip that the Holy Spirit is a double name. So the idea of doubling it for the Spirit.
Yeah. And I think this key, like a lot of the stories are like, you know, like I'm trying to think of one, like I'm gonna say the 40 days in the desert, you know, it could be, you know, where he didn't eat. So like that could be a reference to, like, I'm trying to think of a good one where you can split it up where there's a lot of Bible stories that basically are laid out in this way. Or like another thing is that when after Christ, there's 3 millenniums. So the 3 millenniums of the Christian age. So after the word was given. Just a couple keys, but if I were to, I'm going to screen share this. It's an interesting, let me see if I could do this.
I've never, I only interviewed one other person that was able to take
I think I figured it out. All right, share screen. Okay. Let me see if, okay. Can you see this screen?
Yeah, here it is.
Okay, so, because it's interesting. I think the same parable is in 2001. Can you basically see like the image in the middle here?
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are the
so
the paper.
Yeah, it's like, but the movie starts out in the desert, so it's like already it starts out in, you know, the 4,000 year period technically, and then you have these apes which kind of stand in for, I think they're called ape men or something, man apes, but they're kind of like humanish. So that's like humankind, right? But then you discover the first thing you see is that in the book it says they're pigs. They're amongst these pigs, right? But in the movie it's a tapir, but it has a snout like a pig. So basically it's kind of like mankind being led by what the pig represents, which is like somebody with the false understanding, or somebody with you know, like a leader in the church that you know, swaying you towards one way of looking at things. So they're so it's like mankind before Christ comes, and then even I think it shows like like a jaguar, but that could be like the devil, you know, eating them. Essentially, and then later it kind of shows this watering hole, and it shows man, you know, they can't get to the word because there's these other people like guarding it. So it's you know, it's like they're fighting over the water hole and they have no real way to get to the water. And then later, and it's interesting, so it shows, oh, sorry.
Let's do this.
But
we're gonna take this fourth generation home and give it a huge transfer.
But so then the interesting thing shows up, which is the monolith, if you guys have seen this movie. But also in the book it says there's 50 of these apes. So like in the book, the parable of that is that in the 5th millennium, are you guys tracking with me? Is that all right?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the parable is like there's 50 of them, so that would be in the 5th millennium. This monolith shows up, and it. So I'm putting the monolith as a stand-in for Christ, because in the movie, it's supposed to be like something from an alien world or something that comes and teaches man how to like start producing technology, but in this kind of parable way, it teaches them how to overcome the pigs. So the first thing it shows is them kind of learning to use this bone, and then it shows like him like springing down, and it shows like a pig or tapir in this instance. But I don't know if you guys remember the image, but the next thing it shows is like pig going down or something. At one point, 1 second, but I think it's the next slide or something. But yeah, so it basically gives us the sword to fight the pigs off, you know, metaphorically. But then the next part of this shows, you know, what they use that for, what they use that sword for, and that sword is used to kill other men, you know, keep them from the water, essentially. This watering hole right here in this pig. But sorry, I just thought it was interesting. It kind of, and the whole movie kind of cycles in and out of that. Like the next one resets and it has even more.
Yeah. It isn't really hard to believe. I mean, I think that there are certain things that are interwoven just into the universe itself. People talk about there being the Fibonacci sequence and everything. Like, why is it there? There's certain other numbers too that seem to occur throughout the universe. You know, for whatever reason, they seem to be there. Sometimes without any really good explanation, they just happen to be there. You know, and you know, you see something like if you have like a hologram or something, and then you break it up, then that hologram exists within all of the broken pieces too. I mean, it's not hard to understand from concrete things that you can point to like that there might be these other resonances within, you know, secular things. You know, to me that would be just, I would liken it to the same reason why the Fibonacci, you know, sequence appears everywhere. You know, why the golden mean seems to be, the golden ratio seems to be in everything. Why is it there? I mean, I don't know of a reason why it's there, but it seems to be there. Yeah. And if the truth is the truth is the truth is the truth, right? Seems like it would be everywhere and in all things. I mean, they could take DNA out of you know, one of your cells or whatever, and theoretically could reproduce any organ in your body or reproduce you entirely, you know, from that. I mean, there's something to be said about the truth being in all things, you know. And so I would think in movies, I would think in music, I would think that possibly, very likely, on Judgment Day or whatever, there might be allowances made, but it might be brought up that even if you didn't read the Bible, why didn't you know it from this? Or why didn't you know it from that? You know what I'm saying? Or you could have known it through this, or you could have known it through that. Or, hey, you remember this, here's the symbolism. You know what I'm saying? I think that on some level, you know, like I said, like the numbers that seem to exist, or the patterns that seem to exist throughout reality, this could just very easily be another manifestation of that. You know, I don't have a particular issue with that, because I think that that's probably true. There's probably all kinds of things that you would never know or think about that are just there, you know, that are just sort of in the mix without you realizing or without you knowing. I mean, it just sort of stands to reason that it would be.
Yeah.
I don't think there's anything random. I don't think there's anything, you know, of chance.
Yeah.
You know, I don't think.
See, this is kind of my angle, Robert. Is I feel like if I can expose those things, the best of my knowledge, I feel like it just kind of shines light on a creator, right? Yeah. I feel like for me, I feel like I want people to see those patterns. It's important that people identify to those patterns, because, you know, it really alludes to the fact that there's intelligence behind this reality. And why would we not want to understand that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. But
somewhere in the final analysis, I mean, it is something of an article of faith, I'll admit, but from my own perspective, based on what I'm able to show, I think objectively through the scriptures, I think it's possible to go so far as to say that this is as near to an objective proof of God's existence and his power as can be demonstrated.
I think it is, in our
world. And to see that in the scriptures, it's really not much of a stretch to think that a God with the power to encode such things and then to hide really super duper obvious things from us for a very long time and then reveal them to us in the end and they would hit us like, my goodness, I should have seen this. Why didn't anyone see this? It's so obvious, right? To be able to have that kind of power over history is basically demonstrated by the revelation of these mysteries, right? So if you're able to show people that basically the prophets are reading these books, they're showing these books, and these things were not taught, they were not known, they were not understood, it is because something divine kept us from knowing, something supernatural kept us from knowing. Just like those men, like I said, on the way to Emmaus, were somehow they could not see who Jesus was, did not know that it was him until they finally recognized him. And then when at that point his physical manifestation disappeared, and what they were left with was not what their physical eyes saw, but what their spiritual eyes saw. That was the takeaway, and so basically, as if to say, it's not what is in the flesh, but it is what is in the realization, that's important, the indelible mark that truth left on those people, because at that point their first their primary goal was to go and to tell people what had happened. You know what I'm saying? Because they had that happen to them, and so if these patterns exist, like I said, if they exist in movies, if they exist in music, they shouldn't be too surprising, because I would think, and in a lot of ways, what I'm saying, if you notice it throughout the scriptures, it's just the same thing over and over and over and over and over again anyway. It's like it keeps coming back to the same thing. That's why it sometimes seems like you're repeating yourself, because it's in the story of the blind man who washed in Siloam, or it's like the coin that was lost and then found. You get that whole lost and found thing, and it repeats itself over and over again. Or if you want to take, in the case of the Second Testament, the fact that throughout the Old Testament there were all these references to Jesus in the Old Testament that came true, but all of these prophecies that they keep referring to were all about Jesus. You see what I'm saying? And so it was kind of like saying the same things over and over and over again anyway, the first time when the revelation was given, and so it's not unexpected that it would kind of be the same thing over and over and over again when the second revelation or the third revelation is given. The idea is that sort of proof, the proof of its own proof, or the measure of it, is that it is consistent, because it like I said, it's just over and over and over again the same thing. Why wouldn't those patterns exist in other places? Why wouldn't they exist in the secular?
Yeah. And that's why because I think the main thing is obviously the word itself that has it, like the books and everything. That's definitely the the door to see. And then for me, I think like just to add this other film element, I mean, I've always made movies, but for me, it's an easy, because with this, I was like, I think it was one of like Tarkovsky's movies. It's called Stalker. It's a Russian filmmaker, but I realized because I was kind of into the keys last year in the middle year, but I kind of stepped away from it. And then I watched that movie Stalker, and I realized I can understand this movie fully with the keys. And I was like, well, what else is this movie about if not that?
I think the only one of his, I haven't seen that movie yet. I'm kind of intrigued by it. The only one of his movies I think I've seen is Solaris. And I don't know.
And they all have this element, but I would go as far as to say, like, I don't think it was like, I think he was aware that his movies were like, he didn't exactly know probably what everything meant to him, from certain angle, but I think he was aware of the spiritual element, at least to art, or at least stories, at least. And then visually, he was a big, because I don't think, like, it's not like somebody you could easily recommend. You're like, hey, watch this movie, because it has so much like metaphorical elements, like even Solaris isn't like an easy watch for most people.
No, that's tough. Yeah, I know.
But it does have, but seeing that it has this, and that's what I use, because I used to make a lot of movies when I was younger, as a kid, and I went back to them and I was like, wow, all these movies, like, because I know when I made those, they don't, I was just winging it, like, hey, you stand right there and you'll be a demon and I'll fight you, or something like that. But then I look back and I was like, oh wow, that whole, just this guy standing here is that same parable all over again, it's the same. You know, it's like I was like, how'd that happen?
I think it's probably just inherent in the whole warp and the woof of everything.
Yeah,
I mean, if
probably.
everything is created by a creator, you know, that isn't to say that he's out of ideas. I think he just has a point to make, and that point is made in everything.
Yeah,
you know, that it exists in all things. You know, and I mean, that may just be the long and the short of it. You know, there's just, you know, he's got something to say, and he's going to say it, and he's going to say it through whatever means, you know, whatever medium, you know, whatever. You know,
kind of, to me, it seems like it's like I just keep returning to this thing of like, it kind of just seems like then God becomes as real as gravity because you could just see it. But I don't know if, which is nice, but I mean, I don't know.
But all the same, this is sort of a, you know, it's sort of a revolution in religion, because this is every bit as revolutionary as Christianity was to Judaism. This is every bit as revolutionary to Christianity. You know, this is, I don't want to say it's a replacement. I would say it was a fulfillment. It's like saying, hey, through the canon, you can arrive at, you know, accepting other books. You know, by means of what you already believe, you can go further. You can go deeper. You know, you can go, you know, into realms that haven't been even thought of or considered by means of what you already know, by means of what you already believe, by means of what already, you know, it's like he says, you know, whoever has something in his hand will be given more.
Yeah.
Right. And whoever has nothing in their hand, even what they think they have, or even what they do have, will be taken from them. It's easy to understand that people think they have a grasp on Christianity, but they don't see what is inherently there. And when you show them what is inherently there, then they have the ability to grasp it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. You know, that's kind of the crux of why I bring you guys on to my show, because I want people to see the patterns of, you know, God writing, you know, and the fact when you can actually see these things, when you can actually have that revelation, it just becomes so much more real. And that's what I'm hoping for my audience. And, you know, if you guys shared this on your platforms, you know, I want everybody to just be aware of these keys that are available to us. And so I don't know. So Alex, since you're kind of the newcomer, or Alek, sorry, I think that maybe we can just kind of have a closing remark, because I kind of cut it off at 2 hours for the sake of my family.
Yeah, no, that's good.
Mostly.
Yeah. I guess I just want to show you one more. Can I show you guys another clip?
Yeah.
It? Okay.
Here,
I just want to show you how, because there's two 2001 movies, but because I think one of them gives you an ending that is kind of interesting. I'll just show again, because I think the same I just used 2001, but I actually believe it's in every single movie. But this one's easy. Let me see. I'll just do a quick one, and I want to show you like you guys, can you see? Or did I do it yet? Let me see.
There it is.
Okay.
Got it.
Okay, you got it. Okay. So okay.
Here, I'm gonna put it without our faces here.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
So yeah, there's another part where it shows the moon, which is that ape in the main thing is called Moon Watcher. So he's actually watching the lesser light, if you think about it. So like from a certain point of view, like it's the lesser light of knowledge, I guess. But here, this monolith, they found another one on the moon. So the word again. And if you see how deep it's buried in the ground, so the monolith is right here. And then in the movie, it goes as far as to say that this is 40 feet deep where they found it. So basically after the 4,000 years. So in the 5th millennium, again, they found, you know, the word came. It's the same parable, basically. And there's these lights all around that are like lit up 12 lights, which is kind of interesting because that number 12 we were talking about. And then there's also, I think it's 6. Is it 6? Yeah, 6 men. So again, the 6,000 years. And then they go to... down when they come to the word, you know, they're like investigating it. But it's interesting, at one point, like it has this interesting thing that I'm not sure it was intended in the movie, probably was, knowing Stanley Kubrick, but they're all like by the word or whatever. But then it shows this thing with a light right here, like once it matches up, so emphasizing 12, So like they can't understand, like when the 12, I guess, like if that makes sense to you. But then like jumping ahead, the moral of the movie, they come to the final monolith, and the monolith is like, I think it said like 2 miles or 2 kilometers long. So the final one that they come to in space is referencing like after 2,000 years, the word basically is known again. And the ending of the movie is him like dressed in white, kind of resting finally. And then he points at the word, I guess, the monolith, and then he becomes a child again, which is that metaphor of being able to learn again. And then also, the elect, so he becomes a literal baby, which is the famous ending in the movie. But I like in the sequel, they go back to that same monolith, which was the one that's 2 miles long, and then throughout the movie they say something wonderful is going to happen, like and they once basically the planet Jupiter blows up, but then they receive a message, and it says like, okay, like from the aliens or whatever, or maybe God, all these worlds are yours, so all these worlds are yours to explore. So I look at that kind of like all these books are yours to explore. And then also the explosion of Jupiter led to a new star, and essentially in the movie there's no more night because there's 2 stars, so there's never a night.
It's like
which is we come to understand. I don't know. It's that parable is there, and it's with the exact numbers, and so I guess I'll just say I believe every movie has this, but it's just another. The most important thing is the word itself, and maybe that gets you to see it everywhere, but it's more important to show the word. That it's in the Bible and in the extra biblical books as well, and then but then I think it's actually baked into reality itself.
I think it'd be very interesting to. I think this is why we have eternity. We can go over all of these things, that are baked in, like you say. It's certainly possible. I mean, you can read a lot into things, but there seems to be patterns there, like you say. There probably is some connection there. I wouldn't doubt that at all. I think there are reasons for everything. That's fun, kind of my fundamental realization about it. I just feel like there are reasons for everything, and so instead of asking whether things should or should not be, you should ask yourself maybe why things are the way they are, and adjust yourself and your thoughts and your approach accordingly. I just assume there's a reason why things are the way they are, even if they seem chaotic, even if they seem counterintuitive or whatever. And I just feel like there is something beneath all of that. But like I said, a lot of that stuff, people can take it or leave it, but since we have the Bible and we have something that's fundamentally based on something that I don't want to say it's universally accepted, but at least like among Christians or whatever, we have this core like 66 thing. And I also feel like this is one of the things that Jesus tells us too. He says, listen, when you go out amongst the people, eat what they place before you and heal the sick among them. And we think about what is your spiritual food. Like, I think what he's talking about is like, let's say you're going to that King James only person, or you're going up to that person who believes only in the 66, right? I think what he's saying is by eating what they place before you, it means that you can look at books like Jude, you can look at places in the scriptures that they accept. In other words, the spiritual food that they eat and that they accept. And even from that limited canon, or even from that limited whatever diet that they're on, if you want to take the metaphor, then you can heal the spiritually sick among them by means of that. There's enough within the covers of those books, or that book, that you can actually point to things that they already believe and open their eyes and open their ears based on what they already accept. You see what I'm saying? And that will give them the impetus, if you will, to understand what you understand. Like watching your documentary, I'm thinking, I could, it was nice to see that coming from somebody else, because somebody else understands, because it's translatable. there's something about that resonated within you, and you were able to replicate it and to do it a kind of justice that maybe even I couldn't do. You know what I'm saying? Because what was there was there, and what you saw, and what you heard, and it wasn't just a simple acceptance like, so and so says this, so and so says that. That's a form of idolatry. Like saying, like if you're in a cult, on a cult, and you have like some cult leader, and you say, well, so and so says this, and he's the leader, and therefore, it's not like that at all. It has nothing to do with that. It's like, oh, here's an open door. Can you go through it? Yeah. And you see the door, and you're like, oh yeah, I can go through that. It's a little bit like what was that movie Labyrinth, right? Did you ever see that
I'm gonna watch it again though. It's the 80s. Is that the
remember the entrance into the labyrinth was hidden?
Okay.
Right? And the little worm creature or whatever, right?
Even that, the worm. Yeah.
Because she couldn't see it, right? Yeah. And then finally she saw it, but it looked like it wasn't there.
Yeah.
Yet it was there, right?
Oh yeah.
And what I'm saying is that the entrance into these mysteries, it looks like it isn't there, but it's there.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? And maybe it takes a little worm-like creature to show you that. You know what I'm saying? With that being said, it's a little bit like that. It's a little bit like, entering the labyrinth, if you will.
Yeah.
In that regard. So, I think that those metaphors exist. I think that those kinds of things are there because at some point everything will be explained. At some point everything will be understood. You know what I'm saying? I'm not you could spend a lot of time and energy on that, but within the context of the scriptures, that's the thing that's kind of ironclad, because you can literally take that, and it's not speculative. It doesn't take really. I'm not saying it doesn't take faith. It's just that it's grounded in reason. It's grounded in empirical stuff.
Yeah.
And it's empirically there. And so it doesn't have to be something that's based purely on acceptance. It can be accepted based on a certain objective standard. And that is why, again, I believe that that's the gospel, if you will, for the Gentiles, or for those who are without, as well as those who are within, of course. But that the appeal is strong because, like I said, the literary argument is something that you don't have to first believe in order to see. So with all of this stuff that I don't want to say it's peripheral, but it doesn't, like, you can believe it or you can maybe see it, but it may not translate to every single person. Every person might not accept it on the basis of that. But if you look at the actual scriptures themselves, people know that those things that the New Testament is 2,000 years old, or roughly. They know that these books are, 1900 years old, based on what the scholars have said, based on just the track record of them existing for so long. They understand, they can grasp from that they're dealing with a being that has power over time and space, and has power over energy and people. You know what I'm saying? It has that is the master, if you will, of all reality, just on that. And so it is kind of a narrow gate in a lot of regards, but at the same time, it's as wide and as broad as all existence itself. You know what I'm saying? But the thing that we're told to stand on is the word of God. And like I said, even if somebody hands you just those 66 books, that's what you can make of it. And you can show them the entrance. In fact, when you read the book of 2 Peter, which is written entirely basically around the book of Jude, it talks about that entrance. It says, if you do all of these things, if you add knowledge to your faith and patience and perseverance and all that other stuff, and then it tells you that an abundant entrance will be open to you. You know what I'm saying? Which is a little like the worm showing the girl in the labyrinth or whatever the way in. You know what I'm saying? So if you see it, then like I said, that's what's been given to us as the resource in order to do that. That to me is honestly the clearest way forward that honestly can be. You know, I can't think of any way to reduce it to anything more fundamental than that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Alec, what were you gonna say?
I don't remember. Oh,
You might have lost it.
Oh no, yeah, I probably did, but I agree with everything he's saying. Yeah, because I think this other stuff, it might be like, I guess it's just nice to see it's there. That might be me, like, it's like, oh wow, that's there too. But it's kind of
It's
like
easy to geek out over stuff
Yeah.
like that because
I mean,
because if you see it, then that's a whole other line
Yeah.
of reasoning.
but I
But I'm
think
just thinking about in terms of
to get
moving
someone to see it.
forward. Yeah, the I hate to call it an agenda. I mean,
Yeah.
it kind of is, but
Yeah.
in terms of moving forward, in terms of progress in this direction,
Yeah.
the Bible gives us ample
Yeah.
resources for
I
us
think-
to stand upon, even
I
if
think-
it is on a literary basis.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think maybe like for me, like some of this other stuff, like I just like showing that just because it's something new, but like also like
Well, I think it's there. I
Yeah.
totally agree.
I
Like
think,
I see all kinds of things that I don't myself talk about much or emphasize much.
Yeah.
because I see this as a mission, like
Yeah. No, I see,
you
yeah.
know, shout it from the rooftops kind of thing, where it's kind of like this is something revolutionary. This is something that's undeniable. Like when he
Oh,
says
yeah.
that I will give you a mouth and a wisdom that no one will be able to deny or to gainsay.
Yeah.
This smacks of that very
Oh
much.
yeah, I
so,
think so. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, I agree, and that's how I came to it. Yeah, just through the word itself, and I think that's these literary features are there. It's undeniable once you see them because they're also in the Old Testament, like over and over again, just as they are in the New Testament, just as they are in Acts, which I feel Acts is almost completely unexplored from this direction. Like it's almost like waiting to be unlocked because it seems like that parable is like within every, just like recycling like every chapter of that book. But because more people I think look at that as like a book of history than they do like having the same literary features, but just like in the Old Testament, but it does have, just like the miracles of Jesus have the same thing, you know. So I think it's undeniable, and I think and I even from just releasing this documentary like on Tubi, I've had already like at least 10 people like email me randomly about it, and I've never had that with anything I've done. So I know there's something there, and I think a lot of people are coming to this secondhand and just coming to it like they've kind of already been thinking along these lines, you know. And usually it's like within the last year or so, like just like myself. So
yeah, in a lot of ways I stumbled onto the documentary because of this means of it, not so much, you know, it just that it's some guy asked if I was the one that directed and produced it or whatever, or made it, and I'm like, no, it wasn't me.
it's actually
maybe I should check it out though.
the interesting thing is the title does come from an interview you guys did a while ago, like, because I think Robert put it up, one called "The Bible is a Trilogy," and it was you guys talking. So it's kind of interesting how you came to it secondhand, even though you're kind of involved in the idea of the movie, at least the title. You know, it's kind of interesting.
I'm honored that I would even be part of that, but anyways, but gosh, man, I appreciate you guys. I want to let this keep going, but I can feel my wife like,
oh yeah,
I got the same. Where are you at right now? I gave you 2 hours now. I'm just joking.
Yeah.
But I'm just so grateful for my wife that she'll let me do stuff like this in the middle of the day with the kids and all that. But anyways, but Robert, Alec, you guys are, you know, the bomb diggity. You know, you free. I just appreciate you doing the work. You know, I think what it comes down to is obedience, like this aspect of faith and stuff. I think that faith isn't just something that you can believe. It's more so knowing how to implement, I guess, ultimately. And that because I think we're supposed to make a difference. I think we are. And that's what you guys are doing. So I appreciate you for that. So
thank you, Charlie, for having us on and everything.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind doing this again. And Alec, I wouldn't mind working with you a little more closely on other things too.
Sure. Yeah.
And you know, I think I made a new friend. I appreciate you. And
likewise.
and Robert, you're always somebody I'll probably have back on. You know, there was a little. Gosh, it was like 2 years ago the last time I had you on, wasn't it?
It's been a while. Yeah, seems like yesterday, but time flies. You know, it's crazy.
Yeah. All right. Anyways, I think that we're gonna call it. So
Okay.
I again thank you guys, and we'll be in touch for other endeavors. But keep doing your thing. Have a good day. Okay.
All right. Thank you.
All right.
Take care,
See you guys.
We'll see you.
All right. Bye.
Bye.